Hey everyone, welcome to UX South Bay. It is April 13th, and this is meetup number 35. We usually meet on the Google Cloud campus in Sunnyvale, California, but a certain thing called the coronavirus forced us to do this from our lovely homes. And so we are here today on the live stream, and even though it's just us that you see from our homes, everyone in the community is involved, and we would love you to suggest content, share the meetup with other people, volunteer to speak, volunteer for the community, and just help us experiment and try a few new things while we're in this virtual scenario here. I want to give thanks to our awesome sponsors. We have Tech Systems, who, when we're in person, provides food for the meetup. We have Sketch, who is a longtime sponsor and provides all of the online infrastructure for this meetup. And when we are in person, Google provides us with a place to meet. If you are not part of our Slack group, please join it today. That URL is case sensitive, so just enter that in your browser. We use Slack to announce different events, or if you are looking to hire someone, that's a place to go. If you need design help from the community, it's a place to go. If you just want to meet other designers in the South Bay or around the world, it's also a place to go. Speaking of volunteering, if you would like to volunteer, hit that URL up. We do reach out to people on this list when we need some help. And some of us have been experimenting with different sub-communities. So if you're interested in hosting a sub-community or participating in a sub-community, please reach out. And right now, it's time for our raffle. Usually, we are on a stage and we pull from a cup in a dramatic fashion different tickets and have people raise their names and clap and cheer. But today, we are using the magic of JavaScript to randomly pick some winners. And this month, we have Kendall, Joshua, Greta, and Jane. Congratulations. And I will reach out to you on meetup.com. So look for a message from me, and I will help you get your reward. And now I'd like to bring on Megan to talk about who's hiring.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Quick introduction to myself. If you are new to our meetup, my name is Megan, and I'm with Tech Systems Digital. We're a digital services and staffing agency, and I'm part of our Bay Area team. We help place designers at top design companies all over the area, or all over the country, really. So if you're interested in being connected with one of our specialized recruiters, fill out our form. It should be in the banner right there. And you can also reach out to us via the Slack channel. But if you are hiring, please comment in the comment section, what your team does, what you're looking for. There's also a recruiting channel in our Slack page to help get people connected with new opportunities. So feel free to share your opportunity with the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. And next, we have Kelly Thompson, who's going to come on to talk about design at Google. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Aaron, and hi, everyone out there. Thank you for having me. My name is Kelly, and I am a manager on the UX sourcing team. That means that we work to fill roles across Google here in North America, and that ranges from design to UX engineering to research to I'm forgetting things, but and UX writing and the like. And so I would love for you to drop in your information if you'd like to learn about opportunities, or when we have lots of virtual events to connect folks with all kinds of opportunities here at Google. And certainly we do also have some workshop type events where we try to impart some information to help you successfully navigate the Google process, which I understand and I know to be legendary. So anyhow, please connect via the link in the chat and enjoy tonight's meetup. And thanks for having me, Aaron, as always.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. All right. Next month we've decided to take a break. This has been a time of change for a lot of people, and we just wanted to give people the opportunity, particularly people that have been spending the time organizing, to just take a rest, deal with the family situations they need to deal with, and then we'll be back at it in June, and that is when we are going to kick off our yearly career series. So look forward to that. And now I would like to bring on Riel Canty to talk about the cross-functional design of trust. Hi, Riel.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, one, thank everyone for the opportunity to come here and open up a discussion about us designing. How do we build highly functional and important, useful products by designing trust, right? And so let's just start off with a story and talk about trusting, the trusted, and the trustworthy. So, like, over the past 2.5 years, as I've been immersing myself in the space of trust, I've started, in addition to my everyday tasks of research, really just looking for opportunities to understand how people deal with trust every day, right? And so a few weeks ago, I had a discussion with a guy named Gary, and Gary stays in an area called Yonkers, New York, and just asking people questions like, when do you recall a time when you were going to pay for something but changed your mind? Seeing if something like trust comes up. Right. And so here's an example. Once I was going to rent a bike, but the guy wanted to take a photo of my driver's license and credit card. Well, Gary had a different scenario. He went back to his childhood, and he was talking about this relationship he had with an older guy named I-Born who lived in his neighborhood. And when he'd sit outside, he said I-Born was this terrible guy, but he had a liking for him. But he felt a little uneasy at any time that he would have a conversation with Gary. And so I-Born was known for sticking up people, he robbed kids, but Gary liked him because of who he was and the reputation that he had in the neighborhood. So every time they'd have these conversations, they'd be these really deep, in-depth conversations about who he was and the history, and he asked profound questions to Gary, and it would really stimulate Gary's thinking. Well, this idea, this experience that he was having, that to me helped to kind of encapsulate a lot of what trust is really about, right? And this idea that there's a relationship between two people, two entities, and in that there's some sort of risk, right? And you're trusting somebody, and you're weighing and gauging the extent to which that person is trustworthy. That's what makes trust so highly complex, is that it involves so many different dimensions. And part of what we're doing when we're designing trust is trying to identify what some of those dimensions are. And most important, what is the relationship between some of the key dimensions and the things that we are designing, the experiences, the behaviors, and the thoughts and expectations of our users. So you can learn a lot more about the models, different models and different ways that people are measuring trust, what some of those different dimensions are. You can look at how UX designers are approaching the design of trust. And there are a number of articles that are out there. And I think all of this work, whether it's the scientific literature or the UX design literature, I think it's still very high level. I think these are still some very early stages for us in trying to figure out not just how we understand relationships, how we understand the way that people perceive someone or a product as being trustworthy. We're still trying to figure out how do we get to the point where we can actually design trust, where we can actually identify what some of the key levers of trust are and build those levers in ways that are actually going to be great for the end user and of course for the product. So there's widespread agreement that trust is about risk assessment and relationships. But what I want to highlight today is that one of the weaknesses in a lot of that work is that often the perception and the way that we approach designing for trust tends to hinge on the creation of an artificial relationship, dyadic relationship between, oh, here's an end user and here's a product, right? What I'm going to point out today is that those relationships can actually be more complex than that. And in order for us to really start to approach the design of trust, we're going to have to start tying more closely, more tightly, what we understand about trust, how we're measuring trust, and the actions and the behaviors and the reasoning and experiences that we want to provide for our users. So in this talk, what it's not about is it's not going to be a share out of research. It's not going to be a presentation of case studies that were done in the past. You can get in trouble for that. And it's certainly not going to be a comprehensive discussion of everything around trust. What I want to treat this as really is more of a story circle. So there have been a number of different processes and experiences that I've been involved in and helped to build. And I want to draw on those. I want to leverage some of the other work that other people have done that's out there. And based on that inspiration, just form stories that provide some boundaries for us to talk about. And I want to place the emphasis on the cross-functional design of trust. I think that often research in some organizations and approaches to designing trust, there's a heavy emphasis on research. Research and trying to identify what are some of the key relationships, but very seldom do we get beyond those relationships. There's also in the product building side, overall, there tends to be an over-reliance, an over-emphasis on the need for quantitative data, quantitative relationships. And I want to help us make a shift away from that too. We, as UX practitioners, we have to do a better job of articulating measurement arguments that don't rely on data, numbers, right? And often in some of the work we do, we're not playing a numbers game, right? And we understand it from a brand standpoint that it only takes one or two mishaps and that can blow the entire system up, right? So we're not always playing a numbers game, and people often tend to use numbers conveniently. And as UX practitioners, we just have to do a better job at wrestling with what's in some of those spaces, negotiating those spaces. And then finally, I want to make sure that I do share some more opportunities for moving trust design forward as I see it and as I'm beginning to practice it. All right, story time again. So let's just talk about who to trust. Talking about a relationship. Trust is being involved in a relationship. But as a UX designer, UX researcher, I'm always becoming more curious about, from an end user standpoint, what are they thinking about who to trust? I think too often there's we apply a normative lens to what the end user is thinking. And when there are two parties involved, two entities involved, that can be pretty easy. But what happens when we, say, for example, move into a sharing economy space? With sharing economy platforms, there are always usually at least three explicit entities. You have like a customer, you have an owner of some product, an owner of some property, and then you have the company that's the platform that tends to act as the mediator between the customer and the owner of a property. These three different players, these three different agents inside of a relationship, they add complexity that we have to deal with, that we have to figure out how do we design for that. And we're designing, in essence, we're designing a system. We're designing trust systems amongst not only those three agents, but also when we look at, on a global scale, how those relationships vary across a number of different geos and in locales. And so that means that, we're going to have to deal with different local laws. We're going to have to deal with different policies and customs. And all of this relationship requires us to understand how the relationship is situated inside of that space. So here's a case of Nadia and Nate. Nadia and Nate, they've made plans to visit a foreign country. It's the first time that they're traveling to this country. They've never been there before. They booked a room in a shared flat, a shared apartment, a shared home. And when they arrive, they plan on walking in, just taking taxis during their stay. They've never traveled. This is their first time traveling together, and they really couldn't be more excited about their upcoming getaway. Now, for them, for Nadia and Nate, this is like a sky blue, open road trip that they're about to take. But inside of that space, there are a number of different functions. And so, UX researchers looked at literature, they've looked at academic literature, conducted surveys, they've conducted interviews, and they know that for people who are traveling to places that they've never been before, that the likelihood of things going awry is increased. And so they know that. And given what they know, they're partnering with their designers, with their writers, to come up with a way to better understand and better design for a pleasant end-to-end journey. Now, a question in this particular space is, we might begin to ask is, well, what does that journey look like? And so UX as a function is asking the question of, does the journey start? When does it end? Or does it begin when somebody comes on a platform and as soon as they shut the platform down, the journey is over? Or in this particular instance, does it start before you're just thinking about taking the trip? You're having conversations about the trip, right? And so from an ecosystem, in the way that this platform is built, they're seeing signals about these trips. They take a flight, and as they take a flight, they land in the country. It's a foreign country. They've never been there before. They don't know the customs. They feel confident. If something goes wrong, they're going to call what? 911. How do we know that they're going to call 911? Well, researchers, the design and UX, they've figured that out. They've spoken with people ahead of time. They know what people's expectations are, what their plans are for interacting and existing in this new space look like. And so we know that there are opportunities for the platform to figure out, how do you define what is and what isn't the end-to-end company, the end-to-end user journey, and what is the responsibility and accountability for this company inside of that space. You got to bring in additional functions. So we partner with your product managers. Product managers are connected with certain analysts. They're connected in this particular space with different agents, and policy people are building relationships outside of the company. And we can talk about, the legal, what are some of the legalities, and so legal helps to answer questions about what are the bounds for accountability and oversight for this particular design and set of design solutions. So together, working together, you have the UX functions are providing solutions in-app just through regular features, right? And so for Nadia and Nate, that might look like providing surfacing in certain points in time, beginning to surface some more information about the trip. Right? Maybe it's things like alert notifications. Okay, maybe it's drawing on introducing them to safety articles. Maybe there's something that's taking place inside of the country, and UX is the writers. You're bringing in writers, and we've worked with writers, so the writers come in, and the writers are helping to provide the metaphor. They're helping to build the vision for how it is that you communicate. a lot of times when people talk about trust, we hear in some of the articles that I point to earlier, some of those articles, they talk about transparency. But I think that anyone who has worked with user-generated content or been in the space of trust and safety, understand that one of the most critical questions that we have to answer is how much transparency. And there's always a balance in terms of how much of the window you pull back and how much you don't. And this is a big part of, you know, some of the questions that was the problems that we're solving for by partnering with. We get to those answers by partnering with policy, by partnering with legal teams. In more advanced and more mature engineering companies, they have the resources to start to begin to build some machine learning models, to build personalization into the overall experience. And so for repeat users who are really involved and highly integrated inside of the company or the platform ecosystem, for them, you know, all of a sudden the experience becomes more intelligent. The experience can actually it provides feedback. It knows Nadia and Nate. So when Nadia and Nate are booking a place that they haven't been before, the platform understands that they haven't been there before, that this is their first time traveling, right? So these are some of the ways that we come together, we bring these different functions together to start answering questions and solving for some of the complexities involved when it comes to building end-to-end experiences for our end users. Offline, what happens offline when people are traveling? Well, if Nadia and Nate call 911 in a country in which 911 doesn't lead them to a solution, any relief, well, then they're in trouble. And so there has to be some way of translating what their model is for receiving help and getting relief into an actual solution that's going to be useful. So in addition to some of the online solutions, offline could involve partnering and building safe haven networks for certain types of travelers. Maybe it's female solo travelers. Maybe it's travelers who are moving into a space that for them, based on their ethnicity, unbeknownst to them, or their racial makeup, unbeknownst to them, they're not welcome. It's providing service providers on the ground. So this is overall, you know, part of the solution, and part of our role as UX practitioners is pushing the bounds on what it means to solve for problems. Often the problems are limited to screens, but in some cases, such as many of these sharing economy platforms, those solutions require both online and offline design efforts. So we're trying to build, you know, one of the things that we're working on and today that I'm really trying to push is building more actionable trust models. And you think about, you know, what is it? We understand a lot of times when we try to measure trust, we focus on these three dimensions. So benevolence, integrity, and competence or ability. If you tell me that you're going to do something, do you have the ability? Do you have the competence to be able to carry that out? Are you doing something for me as a product, as a company, because you truly care about me, or, you know, is there some other motive involved? These are some of the questions that people are asking. We see people asking themselves. We hear people asking when they're trying to assess the trustworthiness of a product. But these are still correlational, right? These still get us just the correlational answers. They're not causal. And what often makes people get excited are being able to see some of these models and being able to see the statistics. Well, confidence isn't always a numbers game, and we've seen that. We see that over and over again. Yet we still continue to regress back to this idea that we need numbers, we need statistics in order to demonstrate and build confidence into not only the statistical models, the measurement models, but into the models for how it is that we work, into the models of our processes. moving forward, it's important for us to begin to build more robust measurement arguments. And a measurement argument, statistics and data analysis can all be part of a measurement argument. But we can build logic, we can build intuition into our models. It's valuable. It's the kind of work that when we struggle with when a lot of our work is so qualitative, right? But through just by using the logic, using intuition, using what it is that we know, we can build arguments. We can make a priori predictions before we collect data, test hypotheses, build those hypotheses, and test these models. And just through the arguments ourselves, we can then provide evidence for a robust model. And we need to work on that more. A lot of times when I'm speaking with people and they ask, as a researcher, as a UX researcher, what do you do? Are you a qualitative researcher? Are you a quantitative researcher? And what I find too frequently is what we're really lacking is an understanding of measurement. And with trust, we need to think about trust not as it's addressed, as it's treated inside of an academic space. But we need to think about trust so that it becomes more contextualized, right? So that we know the context matters, so that we begin to account for individual differences in a lot of the variation associated with culture, country, and other individual differences factors. We need to think about what does the violation of trust look like? What are different types of violations of trust? And for each of those different types of violations, how do we begin to repair some of that trust? We need different solutions for different violations. And we're still at such a super high and superficial level that often we're asking trust in ways that make it difficult for us to demonstrate the value of the effort that we're putting into this work. And then there's emotion, right? There's the affective dimension, right? Looking at the various dimensions that I think a lot of people use, the benevolence, integrity, and competence. In that approach, it's a highly cognitive approach. It's how people think. It's how people reason about the agent that they're intended to trust. But often it's emotion, right? Emotion, what happens to the emotional component? Why do we lose that emotional component? And how do we capture that and bring that into our models? Right? And so this to me is just a very rich space of opportunity to begin to push trust further, but from a UX standpoint, it's important that we define and what those approaches look like, right? And that for me has been over the last year has been a greater part of my focus. It's building with the quantitative researchers, the scientific researchers who put a lot of faith in these traditionally academic models into ones that we think are more meaningful, that we can actually begin to find some levers and make, and through those levers, actually see changes, the kind of change that we want in building trust. I think that's what trust is. Trust is designing, when we're designing trust, we're designing both processes and we're designing outcomes. So what are some of those processes that are involved in trust? Yes, sure, it's cognitive, but it's also emotion, right? And in some cases where the question is not who do we trust, sometimes it's what do we trust? In one body of work, there was a question of, as an end user, am I trusting the product, or is there some policy involved? And am I trusting that the product is going to be able to enact that policy? That the product is going to be able to apply that policy in a way that is beneficial to me, right? And if not, then I'm going to stop engaging with that product, right? And so there we're talking about a model of trust that includes not just only perception of trustworthiness, but also one that includes a perception of legitimacy, right? And so how legitimate is a product? How legitimate is a product at being able to fulfill its promise on a policy, around a policy, or carry out a particular policy? So it's not only just a relationship between agents, but also there are artifacts and there are other processes involved, and we need a better sense of what those are. I think the oversimplification of trust as this relationship between an end user and a product, that oversimplification leads us to miss many opportunities around designing for trust. And we should be looking across a number of different products, or even cross products and within products. Within products, we should be looking at what are our particular features, what are some of the particular interactions at an interaction level, at what point inside of the user journey, at what point, and given some set of interactions with that product, at what point does trust start to vary and start to move? So we can look at these micro interactions, these key moments inside of the journey, and try and do a better job of aligning trust and what we understand about trust with those key moments. Looking across products helps us get a better sense of how robust our general models are, right? And sometimes we have models that we think we can, so we have models sometimes that we believe we can apply to across all products. Looking at the variation, the robustness of a model across products, and what enables us to see where there are opportunities for us to tweak the model, for us to come up with a model that does a better job of capturing the kind of variance around trust that, and again, I still think that, that gives us the ability to move the needle, but we're still so far from that. Okay. Yep. I want to open that up for discussion now.
Thank you very much. I wasn't even ready with my questions. I have, let me throw one in here. You're talking about emotion a lot. And when you talk to users, what do you look for when they can't articulate the emotions behind their feelings about trust?
Yeah, well, first, do we even know that the emotion is associated with trust?
Sure.
Right? And I think that if we're going in and trying to get a sense of what trust looks like, right, the best that we can do is start to characterize so we can look at language to get a sense of where people are beginning to pause. And so inside of an interview, right, what does that look like? We get a sense of what we feel, some of the tensions that arise when we speak to end users, and they're describing moments of trust or a lack of trust. And those are important moments. How do we capture those, right? Those is an important question. And then how do we, based on what we're capturing, those moments that we're capturing, those events, how do we articulate them in a way that they can become systematic, and we can then look for patterns across, both within and across users in terms of emotion?
Thank you. So it sounds like, every team needs to be, or every organization really needs to have a team that's focused on trust. I know you're involved in a bunch of different startups, and that you've worked in smaller teams on this problem in the past. Can you tell us some origin stories for some of these trust-focused teams? Like, how did this get started up, and how did you make the most impact in a small organization?
Yeah. So trust is two things, and I want to be clear about a couple of things with trust. One is there's a tendency for us to throw trust at everything, to identify that trust is related to every relationship, every kind of interaction, every type of interaction. That can be problematic, right? Because it's almost the case that if trust is under everything, so now that we've just leveled the playing field. But trust arises. So there's a case with a particular company right now where trust recently came into play. And I'm not sure about why trust all may come into play, but in this particular case, I think what happens is there's momentum building around you. So I think there's momentum building around this company, around trust, right? And it's brand. You got brand. There's trusted. There's different levels of trust. At a higher level, you got at a brand level of trust. You're talking about just, do you in general have a sense of trust? And if brand starts to dip, then you're going to see products scurry to try to figure out what it is about their particular product that may be contributing to a dip in brand trust. But I think right now what I see is more of a do as I see. It's a follow the leader approach to jumping on trust. And I don't think there's enough thoughtfulness put into the way that many of the, so I've seen great examples of design trust, and typically outcomes, but actual programs. There are many trust programs, but actually designing trust. If you ask anyone in these programs, designing trust is elusive. It's a very complex and very challenging effort. And I'm going to talk about what trust might look like that we don't even measure. Remember a few years ago when Airbnb had an anti-discrimination problem. Mm-hmm. Before I had joined the company, and so you had African-American transgender travelers who at the time were booking rentals. And what was happening is they were being denied rentals because of how they looked. Airbnb did something really special in that moment. What they could have done is they could have reached out and said, you know what, that's not us. We're just the platform. That's the host. That's on the host. The host discriminated against you, not Airbnb. But they did something special. They said, you know what, we're the one providing the door. We're the one making the introductions between the two different agents. And so we're actually going to be accountable for that. We don't want any discrimination happening on the platform. So what they did is they said, you know, we're going to remove faces. We're going to remove a lot of the descriptors that hosts see up front. And there's going to be other ways of characterizing who I am as a visitor, as a guest. You'll then make that decision, and then, oh, look who I am, right? And that was an important step, because one, there was accountability, and then there was action, and then following that, they created an anti-discrimination team. And Diaz helped to start with others, an anti-discrimination team. And that's how you build. That's a way of building trust. But notice that's still post hoc. That's like after the fact, right? And so, you know, how do we get to a point where we can look into the future? We do a better job of looking into the future and really designing those future states. This is incredibly challenging. This is why I think, you know, for when it comes to something like trust, following the tail ends, picking up on the tail ends is going to be critical. Like, if you look at a lot of the issues that we wrestle with society when it comes to, for instance, marginalized groups, that problem around anti-discrimination could have been addressed far in advance. Like we always look back on a lot of these kind of issues. So like 30 or 40 years later, we'll make a change and we'll say, well, I can't believe we were even thinking like that. Because there's certain things that we have socio-historical context information on that we should start to bring in. And this is why I'm strongly suggesting that our trend is going to be moving. When we design for trust, it's going to be, UX is going to have bring its own character, its own flavor, its own texture to the table. And we are going to break away from the traditional reliance on models that simply point out the problem and do a good job of just characterizing these relationships, to one in which we're saying, no, there's something here that your metrics and the general direction that we've been going in simply can't capture. And this is what UX is going to bring. UX is going to bring that intuition, where intuition is typically frowned upon. We're going to champion the balance of intuition with evidence and rigor.
So how much do you think can be done proactively versus reactively? It sounds like the majority of trust work is done reactively. Is it 80%, 90% that can be done proactively?
I don't think that's the numbers game. I think 80% proactively is a lot. I think that it's an impact game. And I think that if we move it 5% proactively, then that 5% is an impactful 5%.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the other way around. I think trying to find those incredible gains that we're used to looking for and that a lot of leadership wants to see that's not the way that we approach it. It's what we need to look for is, where do we get the significant impact? What's the effect size, right? We wanted to talk the language. What's the magnitude of the effect, right? And so that it can be a very small gain, but it has a powerful effect.
I like that. Disha has a question. Hey, Real, does that mean we need to have a little knowledge about cross-disciplinary teams while designing for users? Does it also involve having empathy for our team members?
You know, we talk a lot about a key part of what we do is promoting and understanding mental models. And I'm a big proponent of building mental models for all of our cross-functional partners, right? In all of in our stakeholders. So I want to know how a PM thinks. I want to know how a data analyst, data scientist thinks. I want to know what are their goals? What are their objectives associated with their role? What are their functions? The better that I understand the way that they think and the way that they reason, given their roles and in the context, the more ready, the more prepared I am to interact and to start to solve problems with them. So yes, absolutely, we certainly should be building a richer understanding and connection with our with multidisciplinary teams, cross-disciplinary teams.
Thank you. Leora has a question. Real, should trust be handled any differently with products that users are obligated to use, like in-house tools or enterprise tools? That is a great question.
There's a model, there's a framework that enables you to look at for a product. Talk about things that you have to use, right? So when we're assessing, part of the risk assessment that we're making is this benefit. You can ask a question about the benefit of whatever that product is to us. When the benefit is high and there's no competitors or there's no alternative for us to go to, we're going to continue to utilize that product, right? It's that kind of in-house product, the product that we have to hinge onto. But there's something in us that's going to always be looking for that alternative. And we're going to be ready. You're going to be ready to leave, right? And so for the products that sit in that space that are privileged, these are kind of these super privileged products. These are the New York City taxi cabs in the 90s that in a winter storm, and I used to try to hail to get to Brooklyn, that would just pass me up because they wouldn't go into Brooklyn. That's them. That what you're describing is very similar to them. So when Uber and Lyft comes along, you have an entire group of people who were just clapping their hands and celebrating the demise of this product that, yes, they had to use, but they were forced to use, and it was only privileged. And that's the difference. Products need to realize when they're in a privileged space and recognize that without proper attention to the end user needs, that the end user is still vigilant. End user is still just waiting for something to meet their needs. That's a basic fundamental part of what it is that we do. We're designing for user needs. We're looking for needs. And if we can identify what those needs are, we can help products. We can shift products to move right into privileged spaces and wrestle experiences, wrestle users, wrestle everything away from those privileged products.
I like that response. That's interesting. Joshua has a question. From your experience, how do you bridge the gap when other team members are stuck on statistics and numbers and you trying to bring emotion to the equation?
Yeah, the question around, we need to talk about data. We need to talk about data. We need to talk about what data are. A lot of times when we talk about data, it's always numeric. In all actuality, data is the information that we gather from observations. Sometimes they're qualitative, sometimes they're numeric. None of it is meaningful until we build insights out of those data, right? And so whether it's qualitative or it's quantitative, we still have to build insights. So we need more documentation. We need more UX. We need more artifacts that we can point to give to teams to say, hey, look, read this, check this out. When teams say that we have too small sample sizes that are too small, we need to help. We need to be prepared to help educate them, to make them aware that, but these are some powerful effects. It's okay to have small sample sizes. You don't need to have large samples. But if I take a brick and throw it against your head one time, how many times more do you need for me to throw it against your head before you feel confident that the next time I throw it against your head, it's going to hurt, right? So these are some of the not necessarily that example, but we need metaphor, we need our language, we need metaphors, we need stories to help build connections between people who were lost in data. And I literally mean lost in data. I speak with, as a mixed methods researcher, I know many people who are so bound by the thinking that they were given, that they were guided in ways in which they were guided to think with data, but still don't understand the data that they're dealing with, don't understand the models that they're using, don't understand the social endeavor, the social enterprise of science and mathematics.
Right. So I heard you talk a lot about offline and online solutions to this problem. Like it's a mixture. So there's other design practices like service design out there. If you were to build a team that was trying to tackle this proactively, what would that team assembly look like?
And what is designing for trust? Yeah. It's always contextual. And I would say right away, I would keep out, in general would be our typical functions, design functions. But in a certain context, I might be adding service providers out in the real world. I might of course bring end users and do participatory design, but here's what I think is most important. For me, it's an appreciation for knowledge systems, through different knowledge systems, right? And so if I can bring in more people who have some form of expertise or comfort with different knowledge systems, then I feel that I'm adding a kind of variation that helps me breaks mental set, and puts us in as a team collaboratively in a better position to come up with a number of different ideas, a number of different approaches to arrive at a more viable solution. The idea of knowledge systems is one that sits close to me. It's the guy with a PhD who doesn't look back on his family and say, oh, you don't have an undergraduate degree, you haven't finished high school, but have so much wisdom and so much knowledge about living in the world. And what about groups that, indigenous knowledge systems? It's the people who have been saying, don't put that power plant over there. It's going to kill the water. It's going to kill the planet. And then hundreds of years later, all of a sudden, hey, would you mind coming to work with us over here in Norway, we're working on trying to solve this global problem now, right? Knowledge systems are important in understanding as a user experience practitioner, the value in all knowledge systems to me is just, I'm always looking, it leads me to always look for people with different knowledge. See, I'm not so much into the functions. The functions are important, but what's the knowledge that you're bringing to the table?
How do you think about the role of trust and the relationship with brands and how it intersects with our personal identities?
I wish I could hear more. Can I get some more? Can I hear some more about that?
Yeah, so I was chatting, you can look at the private chat. I was chatting with Wendy, and she was listening to a podcast by Margaret Bloomstein, and they were discussing that the complexity of trust tied to our identity with certain brands. It's hard to leave a brand even if they did something wrong, because you're so, I guess, immersed into the brand from an identity perspective.
Yeah.
And we'll post that podcast in the comments here.
That's wonderful. That reminds me of. It reminds me of coming up and you've got all these urban kids wearing Timberland boots, right? It is all these kids, East Coast, all these kids are wearing Timberland boots. And then Timberland makes a statement and says, we're not making boots for you. But the kids don't stop. They're still so attached to the boots. The boots have become such a part of their identity that even still with that kind of slight, they still can't detach themselves from a boot. So from a brand standpoint, without even doing anything, right? I think it's not like the brand actually targeted that group. From a brand standpoint, it would behoove the brand to understand what were the mechanisms that led to that kind of impact. From an ethical standpoint, it's important for a brand to be able to take a position and understand when that's happening, and to be accountable for that kind of identity formation that takes place. And that's a powerful idea. This idea of people identifying so heavily with a brand, and the danger, the potential danger that can occur if people were to start targeting people's identity. Like, this isn't, not only do I want you to buy my brand, but I want you to be a part of it. Like, I'm literally trying to shackle you. I'm literally trying to tether you to this brand. That's a pretty powerful idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Wendy was mentioning on chat here, when brands break your trust, it's not always easy to leave. There's kind of that feeling of resignation or a misleading investment. Like, I gave some of myself to the brand. I'm wondering how, when you think about proactivity, does that even factor into the thought process of an organization around marketing or building out, or how people are spending their time on this brand itself? Is that aspect of the relationship appreciated?
Well, I think we see it a lot, right? And when you look at some of the metrics that really care, that groups care about within companies, it's engagement, right? It's stickiness, right? And so, we're not talking about it in these terms, but there's most places that I'm aware of, marketing sits apart from UX, from design. And maybe that's best. Maybe there's a relationship, an important relationship there. I feel that there is a certain degree of there's certain propensities in the character of UX researchers, and this is not to speak at all. I'm just want to just focus on UX researchers. It's not at all to speak negatively about marketing. But there was in grad school, really quick, talk about how people move into different fields, and in grad school, in the psych department, cognitive psychology students are very different than clinical psychology students, who are different than social psych, who are different than community psych. And that it says something about how we sort of find our way and at the same time create that our future as we move forward. And I wonder, with this identity piece, kind of UX being these superheroes. We are the champions. We are the users, the users champions, right? It would strike me as very odd to hear a user experience designer, a designer, say, you know what, we need to capture that. We need to capture the user. We don't talk like that. We need to make sure we lock them, get them. We don't talk like that. There's a different approach. We're not celebrating, how many users, we have on board. We're celebrating the quality of the experience. We're measuring the quality of the experience as defined, as characterized by the end user. And it's a different approach.
And I see that there's a tension there where I have seen that played out is where you have a growth team that has a UX designer on it.
Mm.
And there's that desire to throw in some dark patterns or something. And then the topic of trust inevitably comes up. How do you suggest a designer navigate a contentious relationship like that, where they're there to serve the team, but they're also there to serve the user?
Mm. There's always an opportunity to remind people of everyone's function. And so I've been in situations, not to that extreme. I've been in situations where I've had to remind the team of what I'm here for, right? And it is for that aspect of the end user. There's the notion of dark patterns, and what I'd like to have is a better sense to share with them about the relationship between dark patterns and something like trust, to take it back to trust, and how the discovery of dark patterns by end users, how that can put a ding on overall trust. And so that maybe the initial, you may see initial gains in the use of those dark patterns, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it in terms of risk. Let's talk about it in terms of a risk model. Long term, what is the threat, right? What is the threat and what is the risk? And are the benefits, will those benefits that we see short term outweigh the long term costs potentially? But no, those are very difficult. Those can be very difficult decisions, very difficult conversations. But as a role, and I feel that I have that as a UX researcher, I get to carry that role, and I'm okay. That doesn't mean that we no longer get to work together. It just simply means that I feel that I've done my job when I've at least thrown in some discussion, something for that individual or group to stew over after I leave the room.
That's awesome. One last question for those that are listening that are like, wow, I like this idea of proactively building trust. I like this idea of focusing on the emotions and building up these frameworks. How does one kind of build themselves a career around this? How did it evolve for you?
No, I fell into it. Early on, it was just thinking about this is well. So my earliest work was really about building. It's really about my earliest work was around building learning experiences and learning technologies to promote mathematics and science reasoning in children from underrepresented groups. Children that, if a system, education systems curriculums were being designed for, were failing, right? In a sense of, if you design medicine and medication and it leads to long-term negative consequences for groups, those things get removed off the shelves. Maybe there are lawsuits. And so that come from a community where trust is always a big factor. Moving into AT&T, that's where my work started off, was, doing work around, cybersecurity, where I was beginning to understand models, risk models, and so forth. And at Airbnb, it was a natural decision to be in that space, and an opportunity to work around trust, and not just on screens, but also the offline piece was important. That helped me grow as a designer, as someone who thinks as a designer. And then today, even now moving into privacy, and now moving into my role in equity engineering, is thinking about how do we design equity? Well, can't just design equity, just equity. There's underlying that has to be some dimension of trust, right? And so we need to talk about that. And so I think trust is important, and we can utilize and apply what we currently know, but I'm always careful and vigilant, thinking about ways to innovate around our current tools, mechanisms, and approaches to move it forward.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Rial. Everyone else, we are taking a break through May. I look forward to seeing everyone on the live stream in June when we talk about careers. And everyone, have a great evening.